What if the money in your wallet right now, the bills you work 60, 70, 80 hours a week to earn, what if that money was never actually yours to begin with? Not in the philosophical sense, not some abstract lecture about capitalism. Literally, legally, structurally. The paper in your pocket was redesigned in secret over a single weekend in August of 1971 to serve someone else's interests. And the man who did it smiled on national television while he explained why it was good for you. This is the story of the Nixon Shock. The story of one Sunday night when the rules of money were rewritten without your consent, without a vote, without so much as a press conference warning. And if you understand what actually happened that night, if you follow the chain of decisions all the way back to their origin, you will never look at a dollar bill the same way again. That is not a promise. That is a warning. Let us begin with a simple question that most people never think to ask. What is money? Not what it buys, not what it looks like. What is it, actually? If you stop 100 people on the street and ask them that question, 99 of them will give you an answer that describes what money does. They will say it is a medium of exchange, a store of value, a unit of account. These are the textbook answers. These are the answers that make economists feel smart at dinner parties. But none of those answers tell you what money actually is at its core, in its bones, in the darkest room of its architecture. Here is the real answer. Money is a promise. That is all it ever was. A promise made by one party to another that this piece of paper, this token, this digital entry in a ledger can be exchanged for something real, something with weight, something you can hold. For most of recorded human history, that promise was backed by gold. Not metaphorically, literally. You could walk into a bank, hand them a paper note, and walk out with a fixed, guaranteed amount of gold in your hand. The note was just a receipt, a convenient stand-in for the real thing. Now, here is where the story gets dark. What happens when the person making the promise decides, one quiet Sunday evening, that they no longer feel like keeping it? You wake up on Monday morning, and the money in your wallet is still there. It looks the same. It feels the same. George Washington still stares at you from the $1 bill with that expression that always looks slightly uncomfortable, like a man sitting on a chair that is just a little too hard. Everything looks normal, but something fundamental has changed. The promise has been broken, and almost nobody noticed. Almost. Picture the scene. It is the 15th of August, 1971, a Sunday. The kind of heavy, late summer Sunday where the air sits on your shoulders like a wet coat and the whole world feels slightly slowed down. In a private mountain retreat in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, a place called Camp David, a small group of men are gathered in secret. Not senators, not representatives, not the American public who will wake up the next morning and discover what these men have decided on their behalf. Just the president, his Treasury Secretary, a handful of economic advisors, and the quiet, enormous weight of a decision that will reshape the financial architecture of the entire world. Richard Nixon is in the room. He is a man who carries tension in his jaw and suspicion behind his eyes. He has been president for nearly 3 years now, and the economy is grinding against him like a stone in a shoe. Inflation is rising. Unemployment is rising. The Vietnam War is bleeding the country financially as much as it is bleeding it in every other way. And there is a problem, a structural problem, a problem that has been building since the end of the Second World War and has finally, in the summer of 1971, come to a head. Foreign governments are calling in their chips. To understand why that matters, you need to go back further. You need to go back to a hotel in New Hampshire in July of 1944. You need to smell the cigarette smoke and feel the urgency of men who have been watching the world burn for 5 years and are desperately trying to agree on how to rebuild it. The place is called Bretton Woods. The hotel is the Mount Washington Hotel, a grand white building sitting at the foot of the presidential range, the kind of place that, in any other context, would host wedding receptions and summer retreats for wealthy Bostonians. But in July of 1944, it is hosting something else entirely. 730 delegates from 44 allied nations, economists, finance ministers, diplomats, all of them gathered around one central, terrifying question. What does money look like after the war? The man with the most elegant answer is a brilliant, difficult, deeply English economist named John Maynard Keynes. Keynes arrives at Bretton Woods with a vision. He wants a global currency, something neutral, something not owned by any single nation. He calls it the Bancor. The idea is almost radical in its fairness. No country gets to print the world's reserve currency. No country gets to run permanent deficits and simply export their inflation to everyone else. The system would be balanced, disciplined, honest in its way. The Americans say no. The American delegation, led by a Treasury official named Harry Dexter White, has a different vision. And the Americans are in a position to insist on that vision. Because in 1944, the United States holds approximately 2/3 of all the monetary gold in the entire world. The war has been extraordinarily profitable for American industry. While Europe burned, American factories ran day and night. The gold flowed west across the Atlantic, and it kept coming. So when the Americans sit down at the table at Bretton Woods, they sit down the way a man sits down at a poker game when he is the only one who walked in with real money. The deal they propose is this. Every currency in the world will be pegged to the US dollar. Fixed exchange rates. Stable, predictable, easy for international trade. And the US dollar itself will be backed by gold. $35 per troy ounce, guaranteed. Any foreign government holding US dollars can, at any time, walk up to the window and exchange those dollars for physical gold at that fixed rate. The dollar becomes the anchor of the entire global financial system, and the anchor is made of gold. On the surface, this is a beautiful system, clean, simple, trustworthy. It creates the conditions for the greatest economic expansion in human history. The 1950s and 1960s in America are an era of genuine, staggering prosperity. Real wages rise every year. A factory worker can buy a house. A single income can support a family. The middle class expands like a tide coming in, lifting boats that had never floated before. This is not mythology. The numbers are real. The prosperity was real, and it was built, in large part, on the foundation of Bretton Woods and the discipline that a gold-backed dollar imposed on the system. But there is a crack in the foundation. There is always a crack. The crack is called the Triffin Dilemma, named after a Belgian-American economist named Robert Triffin, who identified it in the early 1960s with a kind of cold clarity that makes economists unpopular at parties but important in history books. Triffin's insight was brutal in its simplicity. He said, if the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, the rest of the world needs dollars to conduct international trade. They need a constant, growing supply of dollars. The only way to supply the world with dollars is for the United States to run a balance of payments deficit, to spend more abroad than it takes in, to pump dollars out into the global system. But, Triffin continued, if the United States runs a permanent deficit, it will eventually accumulate more dollar liabilities than it holds in gold reserves. And the moment the world figures that out, the moment foreign governments start to wonder whether the United States can actually back all those dollars with gold, the system collapses. You cannot be both a supplier of the world's reserve currency and maintain the discipline required to back that currency with a finite physical commodity. It is a structural impossibility, a trap built into the design of the system from the very beginning. Triffin presented his analysis to Congress in 1960. Almost nobody listened. The economy was booming. Why fix something that felt so magnificently unbroken? But in the background, the numbers were moving. The Vietnam War was expensive. The Great Society programs, Medicare, Medicaid, the war on poverty were expensive. Lyndon Johnson tried to have guns and butter simultaneously, tried to fight a major war and build a welfare state at the same time, and the cost was borne by the printing press. More dollars entered circulation. More dollars flowed overseas to pay for the war. More dollars sat in the vaults of European central banks. And those European central banks, particularly the French under Charles de Gaulle, began to get nervous. De Gaulle was a man with a long memory and a longer ego, and he had absolutely no interest in subsidizing American foreign policy adventures with French financial patience. His economic advisor, Jacques Rueff, had been warning for years that the Bretton Woods system was a kind of con, that the Americans were writing checks against a gold account that was emptying out. In February of 1965, de Gaulle stood up and said what Rueff had been whispering. France would convert its dollar reserves into gold immediately at a guaranteed rate of $35 per ounce. It was a shot across the bow. Other countries watched. Some followed. The gold in Fort Knox, that legendary vault in Kentucky where America stored its monetary gold, began moving in only one direction, out. In 1945, the United States held roughly $20 billion worth of gold. By 1970, that number had fallen to under $11 billion. Meanwhile, American dollar liabilities to foreign governments had grown to over $40 billion. The math was simple, ugly, and undeniable. If every foreign central bank decided to cash in their dollars for gold simultaneously, the United States could cover barely 25 cents on every dollar it owed. The emperor had been undressed. He just had not been told to sit down yet. Nixon knew the numbers. His Treasury Secretary, John Connally, knew the numbers. Connally was a Texan, big-shouldered and blunt, a man who spoke the language of power rather than the language of economics. He had a phrase he used in private meetings that summer that captured the American position with a kind of breathtaking arrogance. The dollar, he told his foreign counterparts, is our currency, but your problem. Think about that sentence for a moment. Really think about it. 7 words that contain an entire philosophy of financial warfare. The United States had built a global system in which the world's commerce ran on American dollars. And now, when the bill came due, when the structural weakness of that system was finally visible to everyone, the response from the Treasury Secretary of the United States was essentially not our problem. So they gathered at Camp David that August weekend. Nixon, Connally, the Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, a young economist named Paul Volcker, who would later become famous in his own right, and a handful of others. They talked through the options. And by Sunday evening, they had made their decision. On Sunday, the 15th of August, 1971, At 9 o'clock in the evening, Richard Nixon addressed the nation on television. He sat behind his desk, and he spoke in the measured, slightly stiff way that was always his public register, the voice of a man who had rehearsed sincerity until it almost sounded real. He spoke about inflation. He spoke about foreign currency speculators, shadowy figures who were attacking the dollar for their own profit. He called his package of measures the New Economic Policy, a name chosen with the kind of cynical calculation that would make any brand strategist nod in appreciation. And buried in the middle of the speech, delivered in the calm tone of a man describing a minor administrative adjustment, was the sentence that changed everything. He announced that the United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold. Just like that. No warning to foreign governments, no international negotiation, no congressional vote. The window was closed. The promise, the 30-year-old promise that had organized the entire post-war global economy, the promise that underpinned every dollar in every wallet in every country on earth, was simply canceled by one man on a Sunday night during a television address that preempted a popular program called Bonanza. The world woke up Monday morning to a dollar that was backed by nothing except the confidence of the United States government and the inertia of a global system that had no immediate alternative. This is the moment historians call the Nixon Shock. But shock implies surprise, implies accident, and what happened at Camp David that weekend was neither. It was a calculated decision made by powerful men who understood exactly what they were doing and chose to do it anyway, because the alternative, admitting that the American government had spent beyond its means and could no longer keep its promise, was politically unthinkable. So instead, they changed the rules of the game, mid-play, without telling the other players. Now, let us talk about what this actually means for you. Not in 1971, right now, today, in your life. When the dollar was backed by gold, there was a natural limit on how many dollars could exist. You cannot print gold. You cannot create it out of thin air in a government building and then spend it on wars and social programs and re-election campaigns. Gold is finite. It sits in the ground and must be pulled out at great expense and effort. This physical reality imposed a discipline on government spending that no politician particularly enjoyed, but that every citizen quietly benefited from, because it meant the value of the money they saved could not be silently eroded away. When Nixon closed the gold window, that discipline evaporated. The dollar became what economists call a fiat currency. Fiat is a Latin word meaning let it be done, or by decree. A fiat currency is money because the government says it is money. It has value because the government says it has value. And crucially, more of it can be created whenever the government decides more of it is needed. Think about what that means in practical terms. Imagine you have been saving your whole life. You have been careful. You have skipped vacations and driven old cars and packed your lunch instead of eating out, and you have put money away every month into a savings account because you were taught that saving was virtuous. That delayed gratification was the foundation of financial security. Your grandmother told you this. Your father told you this. Every respectable financial book ever written told you this. But in a fiat currency system, there is a silent tax on your savings that nobody explains to you. It is called inflation. And inflation, in a world without the gold anchor, is not a weather event. It is not bad luck or an unavoidable consequence of economic complexity. It is a policy choice. Every time the government needs money it does not have, it creates more dollars. Those new dollars flow into the economy and dilute the value of the dollars that already exist. Your saved dollars buy less. Your wages, even if they nominally rise, often do not keep pace. The purchasing power of the average worker in the United States in 2023, measured against what that same worker could buy in 1971, tells a story that most people feel in their lives but cannot quite name. You feel it in the price of a house. A home that cost $25,000 in 1971 would cost, adjusting purely for official government inflation figures, somewhere around $180,000 today. But actual median home prices are far beyond that. The official numbers understate the reality because the formula for calculating inflation has been adjusted multiple times over the decades, always in the direction that produces a smaller number. Always in the direction that makes the government look better and makes your quiet impoverishment seem less dramatic than it actually is. You feel it in healthcare costs, in education costs, in the slow, grinding reality that 2 incomes today buy less security than 1 income bought in 1965. The system is designed to keep you running, to keep you spending, to keep you in debt, because a person in debt is a person who cannot stop, cannot slow down, cannot ask inconvenient questions about where the money went and who benefited from the arrangement. Here is the uncomfortable truth that the documentary crew needs you to sit with for a moment. The people who designed the post-1971 system are not villains in the cartoon sense. They are not cackling in underground lairs. They are rational actors who made rational decisions in their own interest and in the interest of the institutional power they represented. Nixon did not close the gold window because he was evil. He closed it because the alternative, a genuine reckoning with American fiscal overextension, was politically impossible. Connolly did not dismiss foreign concerns out of personal malice. He dismissed them because he operated within a system that rewarded American financial dominance and punished the kind of honest accounting that would have required sacrifice. The system does not need villains. It just needs incentives pointed in the wrong direction. And for 50 years, those incentives have been pointed very consistently toward the same destination. So what do you do with this information? How do you live inside a system once you understand its architecture? The first thing you do is stop being surprised. Stop being angry every time prices go up, every time your paycheck feels shorter, every time the promise of comfortable retirement seems to recede toward the horizon like a city you are driving toward but never reaching. That anger is exhausting, and it is misdirected. The system is working exactly as designed. Your frustration is not a malfunction. It is a feature. The second thing you do is understand that the primary asset in a fiat currency world is not the currency itself. It is things, real things, productive things, land, businesses, skills that create value. Historically, gold and silver. More recently, for those willing to navigate the volatility and complexity, other finite and decentralized stores of value. The principle is ancient and simple. Do not hold the receipt when the thing the receipt represents has been quietly removed from the vault. The third thing, and perhaps the hardest, is to begin thinking in terms of time rather than money. The deep game being played by those who understand the system is not to earn more dollars. It is to convert time and skill into assets that the printing press cannot touch. A dollar saved in a savings account in 1971 and held there until today has lost roughly 85 to 90% of its purchasing power. The same dollar converted into an ounce of gold in 1971 at the old official rate of $35 per ounce would today be worth over $2,000. The math does not lie. The math never lies. Only the people explaining the math to you sometimes do. There is a particular kind of bravery required to look at the system you were born into, the system your parents trusted, the system every institution around you insists is normal and fair and functioning as intended, and to say, clearly and without hysteria, that something fundamental went wrong on a Sunday night in August of 1971, that a promise was broken, that the architecture of your financial life was quietly redesigned by people you did not elect in a meeting you were not invited to serve interests that were not yours. Knowing is not enough. The world is full of people who know about the Nixon Shock and still keep all their savings in dollars. Knowledge without action is just sophisticated helplessness. The question is what you do with a map once you understand that the territory has been redrawn. The dollar in your wallet right now is a remarkable artifact. It is a piece of cotton paper printed with green ink and elaborate security features and the faces of dead presidents. It says, right there on the front, Federal Reserve Note. Not a gold certificate, not a silver certificate, a note. A piece of paper that represents a debt obligation of the Federal Reserve System, which is itself a private institution with a complicated relationship to the government that nominally oversees it. And it is worth whatever people collectively agree it is worth on any given day, in any given market, in any given crisis. The soul of the dollar, the thing that once gave it grounding in physical reality, in something that existed outside of human decree and political convenience, left the building on Sunday, the 15th of August, 1971, at 9 o'clock in the evening, while most of America was watching television. It has not come back, and nobody in a position of institutional power has any particular incentive to invite it to. What you do with that fact is, in every sense that matters, entirely up to you.